Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's installment of the Talking TIM webinar series. My name is Kevin Vita, and I'll be helping facilitate today's webinar. This webinar is sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration and hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, also known as NOCoE. As a quick reminder, NOCoE offers a variety of resources to support the transportation systems management and operations community. Now I'm going to quickly cover a few logistics for today's webinar. All the attendees are in listen-only mode by default, but we'd like you to stay engaged by using the chat box for identifying yourself and the agency you represent, as well as any additional comments or questions you may have during today's presentations. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations today, so we encourage you to ask as many questions as you have during the presentations in the chat pod as they come to your mind. The questions will be read out loud one at a time by the moderator, and our presenters will answer each question. I'd also like to point out that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slide decks will be available on the NOCoE website within a few days. So that's all I have, and with that, I'll hand it over to our moderator, Paul Joden, to start us off and come back on camera.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. I'm going to keep my camera off today because I'm having trouble with it. Something to do with the platform. Been using it all day, and but rather than play around with it so everyone can watch here, but I see people are still coming in, so now we're gonna hold off for a second. Who's that wise guy that said no camera? We appreciate no camera from Paul. One of my good friends, I'm sure. I have that right, right, Kevin? They're still coming in.
The attendees have about leveled off.
Okay. All right, well, let's get started. So, these are just people entering in the chat. Let's get started with today's Talking TIM, and I think you can go right to the next slide. So, our February version of Talking TIM, Paul Joden with the Federal Highway Administration Traffic Incident Management Program, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm representing my partners, my teammates, Jim Ostrich, and who may or may not be here, at least in the beginning, but I'm not sure. And then Joe Tebow, who I know will not be here because he's had surgery today. So this is a disclaimer that, you know, anything that's talked about today, it doesn't mean Federal Highway endorses a particular product or anything else for that matter. We're not endorsing anything, but we're just sharing information. So can't hold it against us now that we did the disclaimer. So, next slide, please. So today I'm going to give you some updates on Federal Highway, but we're going to have an exciting presentation from on good practices and current research in vehicle lighting and roadway incidents, Dr. John Paul. Getting that wrong again already. So anyways, but and then we're going to have Dr. Grady Carrot, who is part of our contractor team on many different contractors. A lot of you know him. We're going to talk about updates to the MUC and the MUTCD, the latest additions, and how they changed slightly, but importantly for TIM. And then we'll have question and answering, and then we'll have a listening session, time permitting. And of course, feel free to enter any questions in the chat pod as we go along with the presentations. And yeah, and so let's get on with it then. So the Federal Highway updates, we're going to talk about line of duty deaths in the next slide. We're going to revisit the national goal. We're going to start providing a reminder of what the National Unified Goal is, the NUG. For those of you that don't weren't aware or weren't involved, we went through an exercise some months ago to update National Unified Goal and the strategies that are associated with it. But we want to just start reminding everybody what the National Unified Goal is, and maybe you folks and others can start using it as a routine, you know, in your daily lives as well, with your stakeholders. So we're going to talk about the stick funding, safe systems for all, grants, SS4A they call them, and then we're going to talk about Missouri March Talking TIM. So with that, let's go to the slides. Yeah, so we're almost at 700,000. So get your numbers in, everybody. Get your numbers in, please. Next month we want to go over the 700,000 mark. We can all celebrate together. We've worked hard, making progress. So you know, train and then get the numbers in so we can next month say we reached our goal. I'm not going to read that slide here, but I'll just pause a second so that everyone can read it. We're getting there, you know, and you know, so that you're all aware, we don't get all the numbers we really would like to see. We know people do the training and don't and forget, or just not interested in entering it. But we really feel it's important that we get those numbers. And so if you know someone that's doing some training, we've had a couple of instances where there's been a you know, an academy or something that never did get around to logging them, and we've had a big jump because of that. So if you know someone that's not doing it, not entering the data, let us know, or enter the data. So next slide, please. So responder fatality line of duty deaths, always the main priority with traffic incident management. We've had 2 law enforcement, 1 tow operator, and 1 road service technician that has been struck by as of 1/24 of this year. So you know, you know, I think this year, last time we went 2 months without any fatalities. So you know, while we've been making some progress again, we're back to 2019 levels after the spike in 2021. It's still an issue, it's still a problem, and we still want to strive to till we can have 0 fatalities, but we're not there yet. But it just, you know, just a reminder that what we do here is so important for that reason alone. But there are many other reasons for traffic incident management. It's important, of course, but that, you know, sorry to see those 4 have passed in this calendar year already. So next slide, please. So today's presentation on electric lighting, you can go to the next slide, right to the next slide, is you know, part of our everyday counts, next generation TIM, technology for saving lives. Long title there, but so today John's presentation on emergency vehicle lighting sort of fits that. Every month we're trying to touch on the different aspects of EDC 7, which are listed there. So but today is emergency vehicle lighting, and what we can do to make advances in the most effective and efficient use of lighting is what we're striving for. Next. So the State Transportation Innovation Council, this is associated with the Everyday Counts program, and every state gets 120, now 125,000, used to be 100. Every state has the opportunity to spend 125,000 per year. Of course, 20% of that is state match, and per fiscal year. So you know, we urge folks to get in there and ask your State Transportation Innovation Council. So each State Transportation Innovation Council has a committee that will approve it. If you have any ideas that are TIM related, most of those qualify because we are an EDC. Very been active in the EDC program for a number of years. So anyways, don't forget about that stick program. We had about 12 states last year that didn't use the money, and you know, 125,000 go a long way when it comes to TIM, right? So don't want to leave money on the table. Next slide, please. Also, wanted to make you aware of a notice of funding opportunities for the Accelerated Innovation Deployment. They're called demo grants, we call it for short. There's, much larger chunk of money there, but much more difficult to get. Goes through a panel. There's a whole, I'd urge anyone that has a project that sort of needs a little bit, a push, a little bit more funding or a lot more funding, push to get to another level. I urge them to take a look at the website, the demo grant website, and look for opportunities to receive some money. There's certain restrictions that they have, so it's not a like this a blank, a rubber stamp, if you will. But the stick funding is pretty easy. It's like a 1.5 page information that the stick committee needs to provide the federal highway. This is more extensive, but there's bigger funds there. But that notice of funding opportunities is open now, and the deadline is, I guess, April 20. The application deadline is 28th of May. So plenty of time to put together a nice proposal if you could use some money. Next slide, please. Also the Safe Grants program. I'll just pause here for a second. There's a lot of money out there right now. The bill by bipartisan infrastructure law had a huge amount of money with a lot of grants and funding opportunities, and so we're going to just try to every month provide a few of those opportunities here. One of those is the Safe Streets for All grant program. So these are, I was just informed right before this webinar, these are more, the states are not eligible, actually. It's more the localized MPOs and local cities and towns. And there was 1.7 billion awarded between fiscal year 22 and 23. So, of course, there's the website for more information. But we had an example in Faciali, a contractor, put together these bullets. A responder and patient safety improvement project by the town of Colony, New York. They're piloting an emergency vehicle transponder system that will inform other drivers of their proximity to crash responders, which was great. They're piloting a platform that interfaces with specialty care registries to give responders critical health information. And also conducting additional stakeholder outreach, best practices, research, and data analysis to create a pre-hospital health and safety information exchange and structured data warehouse. My apologies for reading that to you, but I'm not familiar with it, and just 5 minutes before the webinar was updated on it. But so those are just 3 opportunities of many. Trust me, there are many out there. You just have to find them. And it was 2.4 million in federal funding for a total of 3 million overall projects. So it sounds like a great project, but that's just an example of what we can do if we're aware of availability of some of these funds. So oftentimes, if you have any questions and you have something in mind, you could use some money for this, especially when it comes to innovation, you reach out to your Federal Highway Division office, and they can oftentimes steer you in the right direction. Next slide. So now it's time for our presenters, starting with John Bullock. He's a program director for the Mount Sinai Light and Health and Research Center. He coordinates the center's research programs in transportation lighting, pedestrian safety, and human factors. He is a fellow of Illuminating Engineering Society and has co-written more than 500 articles in technical publications on lighting. So everybody, this guy is the real deal, right? He really has dug into this whole lighting issue. We've been all talking about lighting for many years. We are becoming more efficient. and uh, prioritizing the use of lighting and what is the proper lighting, and you know, it's just been an important topic. So we're lucky to have with us today someone who's really extremely knowledgeable on the topic. So with that, since I'm not as knowledgeable or anywhere near close, I'll pass it over to John. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul, and I really appreciate the chance to be here. As Paul mentioned, I'm with the Mount Sinai Light and Health Research Center. It may seem a little strange to be coming from a medical school and talking about lighting, but actually better lighting will hopefully make fewer accidents and crashes, and that is good for our health. So this presentation, I'm going to focus on warning lights and vehicle markings for emergency vehicles. Just to let you know, a lot of our research is also focused on utility vehicles and highway maintenance types of vehicles. But the principles are really the same. And I hope to end the presentation with a couple practical suggestions that you may be able to use in your own agencies. The next slide, please. So again, our center, we're part of the Department of Public Health Science and Policy at the Icahn School of Medicine here at Mount Sinai. We're actually in Albany, New York. Most of the medical school is located in New York City, but we do have a lab here in Albany. And I manage the research activities related to transportation safety, things like visibility and glare and human factors and those kinds of questions. Next slide, please. So when we get to flashing lights on these types of emergency and service vehicles, they serve multiple purposes, or what I call aims. And I specifically use this acronym AIM to describe what these lights should be doing for us. A is for alerting, which is why the lights are usually flashing in some way, because the flashing lights do a very good job at getting our attention. But these systems also need to serve, or at least not hinder, two other purposes. I stands for informing, so that drivers who are approaching vehicles with these kinds of lights are aware of what and who they may be approaching. And finally, M stands for managing. So these lights and markings also should help drivers understand where and how fast or slowly they should proceed past an incident to maintain safety for those people working in and around that incident. Next slide, please. So a major issue with flashing lights is that they are often very bright, especially at night, like we can see in this animation here. And they often flash randomly when you have especially when you have multiple vehicles. And this is certainly very attention-getting, but it doesn't really help an approaching driver to decipher what's going on or who might be around those vehicles, how they should approach or pass, or even if they should drive past at all and maybe they need to come to a stop. So this is the kind of visual chaos that we would like to tame. Next slide, please. So one of the important parameters of flashing lights, of course, is the intensity, how bright they are, just to put it in layman's terms. That's an important performance parameter. And interestingly, the published standards for these kinds of lights that come from the SAE and the NFPA, for example, only specify minimum intensity levels that these lights should be able to produce. And this goes back to the days before LEDs, when you were using largely halogen sources with filters, and you wanted to make sure that these lights were bright enough, especially under bright, sunny daytime conditions, when these lights, the brighter they are, the better they are for those bright, sunny daytime conditions. But of course, at night, and we're seeing this as more efficient LEDs that are able to produce more light with less power are being used more and more frequently. At night, these can create glare. And that is something that probably we've all noticed on the roads. In a recent field study, we wanted to look at this question to see, particularly at nighttime, how the peak intensity of flashing lights, say on a maintenance truck, like you can see in the pictures here, affect a driver's ability to see a worker standing next to that vehicle. And that worker may be wearing a reflective vest, like you can see in the bottom picture, or not wearing one, like you see on the top. So we could adjust the peak intensity of those lights and see how far away drivers could see that worker standing next to the truck. Next slide, please. So these are the results. Now you can see the chart shows as you move from left to right, the light intensity of those lights gets brighter, and the vertical axis, as you go from bottom to top, is how far away you could see a worker. And with the safety vest, when the worker is wearing the safety vest, you can see that worker from more than twice as far away, which is obviously a good thing, and hopefully will, that's more evidence that wearing these safety vests is a good thing. You can begin to see just, it's a fairly flat curve at the top, about 800 plus feet of visibility distance, maybe just beginning to turn down at that very highest peak intensity of 700 candelas. For the worker that isn't wearing the vest, you can see that those distances are much lower, only between 300 and 400 feet, and actually get closer to 200 feet by the time we get to the highest intensity. Once that intensity is getting higher than 150 candelas for the peak intensity, you start to see those detection distances going way down. So that's definitely because of glare from those lights. And again, this is at nighttime viewing conditions. Next slide, please. So another factor which you may not have considered, and we hadn't really considered very much when we talk about these flashing lights, is actually the amount of modulation. Most flashing lights have what we call 100% modulation. They go basically from entirely on to entirely off and sort of alternate between those two states, like the one on the left in this little animation. The light on the right is essentially a steady burning light. It has no modulation, 0%. But again, with light emitting diodes, LEDs, this technology does allow us to very easily create different amounts of modulation. The lights don't have to flash just in an on-off or be steady burning, like it might be easier to do with an incandescent or filament source. They can have reduced modulation, like the one in the middle that modulates between full and half output, for example. That would be 50% modulation. So we're going to look at this factor and see how it affects drivers' ability to see what's going on. Next slide, please. So that modulation does matter because it is much harder to judge the relative speed and distance of a vehicle that we might be driving behind with flashing lights at 100% modulation than it is to judge the speed and distance of the same type of vehicle with less modulation, more steady burning lights, for example. So drivers behind these snowplows took longer to judge when the snowplow was slowing down, when those lights were modulating at 100%, like you see on the left, compared to the steady light bars, which have much less modulation. So there was about a 2.5 second advantage with the lower modulation. You could tell when that truck was slowing down and when you were beginning to approach it from behind. So that's a big difference, and it does help to have lower modulation for these types of situations, what we call closure detection. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, this is the type of visual chaos that we're trying to fix. We can see our bright, randomly flashing lights with 100% modulation. Next slide. And if we take our advice and reduce the nighttime intensity and also reduce the amount of modulation, you can see that the scene becomes a little bit less chaotic. This is definitely something most drivers would tend to prefer approaching at night than the one on the previous slide. Okay, next slide, please. So some other things that are important to think about is the fact that often there are multiple lights on vehicles, not a single light, and there often are multiple vehicles. So there are a lot of these different lights, and this multitude of lights and vehicles can definitely add to the visual chaos. So the standards that I mentioned previously, such as those from SAE and NFPA, are applicable to a single light or to a single location on a vehicle. And that's important to keep in mind. We already know that in many situations, there are many lights and many vehicles present, and the random flashing of all those different lights on different vehicles only seems to add to the confusion in certain cases. So we wanted to look at flash patterns. Is there any benefit, for example, of synchronizing the flashing of those lights? Or as we can see in this little animation on the bottom of this slide, flashing them in a sequential pattern. Next slide, please. So in a field study, we actually investigated drivers' responses to incident scenes, in this case containing several police vehicles. So each of these vehicles had an array of different flashing lights, and those could be flashing randomly, where all the lights are flashing on and off at different times across the different vehicles, or synchronized across all those vehicles. And in this study that was done both in the daytime and at night, we asked participants to identify the location of a police officer silhouette that was located to either side of these vehicles. So in this case, you might see in the daytime photo a silhouette of a police officer standing to the left of those 3 police vehicles. People would have to sort of look up and judge where that police officer was standing among those vehicles, with the lights either flashing randomly or in a synchronized manner. We found that when the lights were synchronized, and this was at nighttime, that the people were actually able to find that police officer more quickly, by about a second sooner than they did when the lights were flashing randomly. So it does seem to reduce the visual chaos and help drivers figure out what's going on, giving them some better information. Next slide, please. We also wanted to see how drivers respond in terms of their, say, driving speed, for example, in response to synchronized as well as sequential lights. And we found that when drivers were approaching a situation with synchronized barricade lights in this case, they actually slowed down more than they did when the lights were flashing randomly or in a sequential pattern. So this may be something to think about when there's going to be a lane closure or road closure and the driver does have to come to a stop. Synchronized lights seem to be something that drivers will interpret as something that they should slow down more for. We also found that when you use sequential lighting, for example, from left to right or right to left, for example, to indicate a lane closure and you want traffic to move over to the left or in some cases to the right, using sequential lights to do that actually reduces the visual discomfort that drivers feel. It makes them feel less uncomfortable, even if the brightness of those lights is the same compared to randomly flashing lights. So people will judge sequential lighting as less glaring because it gives more information, even though the brightness is the same. Next slide, please. So here again is our original scene of what we would like to fix, the bright lights, on-off flashing, and visual chaos. So now let's continue to add more advice, looking at the next slide. So in addition to reducing the intensity and the modulation, now you can see we have these lights all flashing in a sequential manner. So this might tell a driver, if there's downed power lines or a tree or something and on the right side of the road, they should move over to the left to pass by that safely. It's a much more informative and useful visual scene. Okay, next slide, please. So another flashing light property that can be important for driver perception is the flash frequency or the flashing rate, how fast those lights themselves are flashing. In general, people will judge faster flashing lights to be related to a more urgent or dangerous type of situation. So we carried out an experiment to try to test this and try to see if people could actually understand what this meant or what it might mean in certain situations. We actually asked subjects to predict in a study whether a vehicle that was stationary was going to either start moving toward or away from that subject. So in other words, were they going to start getting farther away or closer to where they were going? And in some cases, we flashed the lights faster for one particular direction for some subjects or in the opposite direction for other subjects. But each subject had a consistent pattern. When the vehicle was moving towards them, for example, the lights would be flashing faster. And when it was moving away from them, for example, the lights would be flashing slower. But we didn't necessarily tell them that. And so in this experiment, we actually asked them before the vehicle started moving to predict which direction they thought that vehicle was going to start moving. And of course, at the beginning, people are just guessing, and it's 50-50. But even without giving them any sense of what the flash rate meant, they learned very quickly once they saw this consistent pattern and were able to, even after just a few trials, to really get very good at judging and predicting which way that vehicle was going to move. So what this means is that we may actually be able to use the speed of flashing in certain situations as an indication of something that's going to happen that's a little bit more dangerous or where drivers need to exercise a little bit more caution. For example, in a stationary incident scene, if a vehicle is going to leave that scene and re-enter the traffic stream, their lights could flash at a faster rate and start flashing faster and give drivers an indication that that vehicle is more likely to move. Or if a vehicle is driving in reverse, where that operator has less of a visibility of what's around them, a faster flashing would tell other drivers, others around that vehicle, that it's a bit more of a dangerous situation, that that driver may not necessarily be able to see them very easily. So there's ways to use this as a way to communicate to others about what the situation is. Okay, next slide, please. So probably the questions that we get most when we're asked about flashing warning lights and emergency lights is the color. What's the best color of these lights, for example? Now, different jurisdictions might use different colors or require different colors to represent things like maintenance. We often use amber for maintenance vehicles versus blue and or red for emergency vehicles, for example. And different jurisdictions will have different requirements for those colors that are used. And certain departments of transportation are experimenting, for example, with green lights on snowplows and other things like that. So it's not necessarily a universal code across the entire country. Each state may have their own code, and some may even be at a local level. But we wanted to look at least people's perceptions of these colors and what they mean in terms of visibility, as well as things like discomfort glare. How does the color of the lights affect those things? So those are questions we looked at in a recent field study with the Emergency Responder Safety Institute, where we tested flashing lights of different colors, but the same intensity levels. And drivers would approach these in a sort of mock-up incident scene at the side of the road with these different colors. And one of the questions we asked was which lights were more visible. And it turned out that people judged, the graph on the top shows us that people judged the red and the blue lights as the most visible. And that seems to be because our perception of those colors is that they seem to be more saturated. And that makes them look brighter, even though they had the same intensity level, the same candle power, and that makes them more visible. However, the lights that appeared brighter didn't always create more visual discomfort. Just looking brighter doesn't mean it's going to be more uncomfortable. We found that it was the blue and the white lights that were rated as the most uncomfortable for the same intensity. And it does seem like there's something about our eyes that does have an increased sensitivity to blue light for this discomfort glare response. And of course, blue lights are blue, and white light contains blue wavelengths as well. So lights that contain those short blue wavelengths are the ones that are going to have more discomfort for other people. And I think we've all noticed this, for example, driving at night, as we see the shift from yellowish white halogen headlights to a more bluish white xenon or LED headlights on many newer vehicles. And there's something we notice about that, and that's something there's a lot of people complaining about in terms of headlight glare as well. Okay, next slide, please. Now, something that has often been overlooked about maintenance and emergency vehicle lighting is the usefulness of just a little bit of steady illumination around a service vehicle that has flashing lights. So in all four of these video clips, there's a model of a first responder standing next to that vehicle. But you could probably only see that little police officer in the two clips on the right. And that's because there's a roof-mounted light in each of those situations that's just providing a very low amount of light, white, steady light around the vehicle. It's only about 1/10 of a foot candle, a few times more than a full moon. But it's enough to make that operator much easier to see. And we found that you can see these much more quickly and more accurately when there's just a little bit of light. A little bit of light goes a long way. Okay, so next slide, please. And in a study that we just completed in the last year, we were looking not only at the lights, but the vehicle markings, the reflective markings that are on many of these vehicles. So this was a similar study to ones we've done before, but in this case, we were looking at vehicles with high reflectivity, retroreflective markings, or lower reflectivity markings. When the markings were a higher retroreflective level, they're producing more light back to the driver's eyes from your headlights. It actually took people longer, as you might expect, to see where a firefighter was in this particular scene. This was stimulating the back of a fire vehicle. Now, this matters because just like with the flashing lights, the standards for vehicle markings require minimum retroreflectivity levels, and many agencies are using much brighter or higher brightness levels than the minimums that are required. And it turns out that can be a situation where we're creating more glare for oncoming drivers and making it harder for them to see. Next slide, please. So just to kind of tie this together and give you some initial suggestions for flashing lights and markings, I think most important is probably this idea of reducing the intensity at night. This keeps the alerting effects of light. We can still see the flashing lights and it gets our attention, but allows responders to be seen more easily. And maybe we need to think about, particularly for nighttime, if there are upper limits for how bright those lights should be. At the same time, I think just a little steady illumination around a vehicle is something that can go a long way at making responders easier to see when they're outside their vehicles. Another thing to think about is that just like lights can be too bright at night, so can the retroreflective markings on some of these vehicles. They don't always have to have the highest possible reflectivity. The minimum standards are more than enough to make these vehicles easier to see. And a growing number of systems are becoming available that offer this high-low versus on-off flashing, which is beneficial for closure detection. And then again, with multiple lights in vehicles, if you have access to functions with lighting systems that use synchronized lights and sequential flash patterns, that will help inform drivers and reduce visual chaos. And finally, keep in mind that you may not have the flexibility to select any color for your lights, but blue and red lights tend to be rated as most visible, while blue and white lights seem to be more glaring among the colors that we looked at. I'm just about done. So the last slide here, I just want to thank the National Operations Center of Excellence for inviting me to participate. All the different sponsors, I'm not going to read these to you because you can see them. Our many collaborators as well are listed here. And my contact information, if you happen to think of a question after this webinar is over, I'd be more than happy to try to answer. So anyway, I appreciate your attention and look forward to any questions you may have. Thanks.
Thanks, John. That is a great presentation, simplified for my benefit and others, I think. And I really love the last slide where there's some bottom line things that we can do or attempt to do or think about doing from a policy level, from an individual responder level, as we're purchasing vehicles and adding lighting systems to that. So it's really really a great presentation, and we've been again going back and forth on this topic for a long time. So I think we're and a lot of times they talk about a lot of the research and a lot of the findings. They don't make concrete recommendations like you just did there, John. So I think that's fantastic. So for those of you that have any questions for John, feel free to put them in the chat pod or wait until after our next presentation, and there'll be opportunities to talk to ask verbally if you prefer that. So next up is our good friend Grady Carrick, who I know his resume a little bit, so I'm going to just try to do the best I can to provide a high-level background on Grady. So Grady is retired Florida Highway Patrol. He was the chief of Northern Florida for several years before his retirement. I knew him before his retirement, so I can verify that is true. But many years on the road, as a state police officer, patrol officer out of Florida. But he's also unique in that he has a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in transportation engineering. So he likes to do research and things like that. Grady is involved. He's been on the ground floor with the National Responder Training as a master trainer. He's been involved in many federal highway projects. He's one of the lead experts in TIM data in the country, crash data, and our Everyday Counts program is another one he's been involved in for years, both with the crowdsourcing and the TIM program. So just a tremendous background. But we asked, there's been some new manuals that have come out. The Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD, and the MUC have new versions, the model minimum uniform crash criteria. Both of those have just released the latest edition, so we thought it would be a good idea to share here some of the updates, and Grady is the best one to zero in on what those updates or changes were that affect him. So with that, Grady, Take it over.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that introduction, and welcome to this month's Talking TIM. And as Paul mentioned, these two publications, they're U.S. DOT publications. One is housed in the Federal Highway Administration, the other in the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And so today we just wanted to introduce them. They're not revised very often, and the fact that both of them were revised really within a month of each other was something neat that presented an opportunity for us to present them to you today. So the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices is one that many of you are probably familiar with. It's something that's covered in the National TIM Training Program, and it's really the Bible for transportation engineers. It's all about signs, signals, and markings nationally. And then the other publication is one that probably most of you aren't familiar with, because its audience is very narrowly focused on people that do data and design of traffic crash report forms at your state level. So let's go ahead and dive in and look at these two. Next slide, please. So the first one is the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And this publication's been around for decades. And like I said, it is the Bible for people who do sign signals and markings, or DOT and public works agencies out there. And around the country, everybody conforms with this manual. And that's why when we go from place to place around the country, signs and signals and markings look familiar to us. There are three ways that states adopt the manual. They can either adopt the MUTCD as it is, or they can add a state supplement, or they can kind of reshuffle the document and put their own cover on it and call it their state version. But the contents are substantially the same regardless of where you're at. Next slide. So we know from, again, our National TIM Responder Training Program that this document has some content that relates to us in the TIM world, all of us responders, all of us boots out on the ground out there on the road working traffic incidents. So listed here are some of the sections from the MUTCD that relate to our job as traffic incident responders. Next slide. So what's new in the new revision? So just a couple of bulleted items, and then we'll drill into some of the things that have changed. But some of the new content, the first thing is that it is no longer 6I. Within this huge document, there's 5 or 6 pages that relate to what we do in TIM, and we've always referred to that as 6I. We always lamented because depending on what font you use, it looked like a 61. So we thought, well, when they changed it, they told us they were going to change the section number. We thought, wow, that'll be great. But they changed it to 60, so now it looks like a 60 instead of a 61. So we can't win on that account. So in the future, when you talk about 6I, it'll now be 60. There's some new content that talks about temporary traffic control plans. And usually these are for planned events, work zones, and things like that. But wherever practicable, the MUTCD wants us to try and have some ideas going into traffic incident management and some of the things that we would like to accomplish there at a planning level. The term rolling roadblocks, we've done rolling roadblocks for years. This is actually a term now that you see in the MUTCD. So it is one of the types of temporary traffic control activities. Not a lot of content there. It's just a mention, but maybe it's a first attempt at really kind of giving validity to something that's been done a lot over the years. And then there's a new section on active lane management, particularly during incident conditions. And this will be good for our TMC operators in that audience. Next slide. So when we talk about old and new and the things that have changed that are really related to us as TIM responders, it I think begins with worker safety and the high visibility safety apparel, HVSA, the traffic vest. And in the old version, the 2009 version of the MUTCD, we had some discussion in one section, and then it told us what we had to do in another section. Well, the good news is now in that 6C05, which is the new section number, it puts it all together. It tells us who's required and what they're required to do and what the exceptions are, and they put it all in one chapter now instead of 2 different places. So big benefit for us. They did update some of the years. We always had these version years for the ANSI standards. So those years have been brought current. So that's good news for us as well. Next slide. Flagger control is another place where there's some minor adjustments. Again, that section number has changed from 6E to 6D. But one of the important changes, and again, very small, but they allow us now as incident responders to flag traffic, without flags and wands and stop paddles and things like that. So the language in there says that when we have a one-lane, two-way situation, responders can flag traffic with simple hand movements. Next slide. The previous version talked about safe position, and one of the frustrating things for people when we had our classes and the students is they'd say, well, what is this safe? It tells me I have to do safe position. What is that? Well, we had to go to a different section and look up safe position as a definition. Well, what they've done is they simplified it now. They took the word safe positioned out, but they brought the actual definition and the content over into 6.0 now. And so they haven't done away with safe position. They just did away with the term and introduced the concept. And that concept there is listed. I copied and pasted it for you, and we're familiar with it. We're just going to position our vehicles in a way that protects the incident responders and the road users. And to the extent that we can, we're going to minimize the disruption to traffic. Next slide. The another change for 6I/6.0 is that a lot of that guidance language that it talked about, when it talked about temporary traffic control devices should be available, and you should be setting up proper diversions and upstream warning and all this guidance language that was there, that's been taken out. So now it just describes major, intermediate, and minor. And it also took out that language that said that flaggers have to either be flagger trained or law enforcement. So now again, it opens that flagging up to the situation that we've always encountered, and that is a lot of folks have to do flagging. So those are just a few of the little minor changes in 6.0. Again, nothing huge in that chapter. Next slide. One final change, I think, is the traffic cones. Again, nothing on the technical side. They didn't change the color, size, or shape, or reflective bands or anything. They just, again, changed where it's at. So when you go looking for traffic controls instead of traffic control devices, instead of 6F, you'll be looking over in 6K now. Next slide. And then there's that active lane management during incidents. And we're seeing this being installed around the country on a lot of major roadways. And this helps differentiate lanes that are open and closed. And we are able to change the speed limit under incident conditions, and also use some DMS messages and CMS messages to inform drivers and ahead of the incident they're approaching. Next slide. All right, so let's pivot over to the other document now, the Model Minimum Uniform Crash Criteria. It's also referred to as the MUC, and this is really a minimum set of guidelines. And they say, okay, states, everybody's got their own crash report, and we're not going to tell you how it should look, but when you put data elements on there, here are the data elements that we think are important, and here's the structure and the way that they should be done, so that someday down the road, when we try and merge data from different states, we're able to do it more seamlessly. So again, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, is a sister agency under the US DOT to the Federal Highway Administration, and they're the ones who support this document. Next slide. So we're all familiar with the TIM performance measures and those TIM data elements. What are we looking for when we look in data to help us do TIM better? Well, we look at responders struck by crashes, the times when we as pedestrians are struck or vehicles are struck at incident scenes, secondary crashes, those in the queue, including the opposite direction, the time it takes us to clear the roadway or the travel lanes, and then the time it takes us to get off the scene. The last responder has left the scene. And off to the right, you see there are different ways that we can get at this TIM data: crash reports, TMC data, police dispatch, fire dispatch, and then safety service patrol data. And all of them do a little bit of this, but the crash report really does a good job at responders struck by crashes and secondary crashes, because by law, these events have to be reported on crash reports. Next slide. So the challenge for us is getting these data elements for these performance measures on all of the state crash reports. And we see here, this is a MUC mapping. This is where NHTSA has gone with the state crash reports, and they want to see which data elements every state has included in their current crash report. Now, state crash reports aren't revised like every year. Sometimes states will go 6, 8, 10, 12 years between revisions of their crash report. So when this voluntary standard called the MUC comes out and it's revised, sometimes it takes several years for new data elements to get included. So that's what we see here. Some of our responder TIM data elements have been in the MUC for a few years now, but it's still taken some time to get them included on many crash reports. So that's what's being illustrated with this table. Next slide. So what's new with the new MUC? They did a great job of helping us clarify roadway clearance time and secondary crashes. And then they're also helping us better identify when responders as pedestrians are involved in incidents. The final one there at the bottom is this UUID, and creating linkages with medical data, EMS run data, is something that we think might help us identify responder crashes down the road. And again, it'll take some time for these new features to be included in state crash reports, but it's something that I think is at least on our radar now. So a UUID is not something that a police officer is going to be writing in on their crash report when they're out on the side of the road. That will be something that will be merged between the EMS run data and the crash data down the line after the report's been completed and submitted. Next slide. So roadway clearance time, this is where things again have been improved. We've actually gone in and we've added some language now that says if the roadway was not blocked, don't put zeros in this field because that's going to skew the data. So there are ways now to handle not applicable travel lanes not blocked and unknown. Because again, if we put zeros in there and we aggregate those zeros in with real data, it's going to skew the actual clearance time averages that we're looking at. So that was a really beneficial change for us and something that was cleaned up. Next slide. Secondary crash is another one that was really kind of cleaned up. This was added in the last revision to the MUC, and this time around they've clarified and they said, look, if you think you have a secondary crash, just tell us yes or no. There's a checkbox there. But they went in and they added some qualifying language, and they said, look, it's really difficult to know what's secondary to another incident, a piece of debris in the roadway or something else that's happened out on the side of the road. So we're going to try and simplify it. Your crash was secondary to another crash. And the way we're going to handle all the other types of incidents is in another place. But that's one of the things that we think is going to help improve secondary crash capture, is that crash to crash relationship. And if it's something else, we'll find it in related factors. The other thing we want to do is link back to that primary crash report. So we're going to capture the primary crash report number whenever there is a secondary crash. Next slide. So that related factor that we talked about before. So it's not a crash to crash. Now it's something else to a crash. So they created a group of incident related conditions that investigating officer would document or code on their crash report to say, hey, this was a secondary crash, but it was related to something else. So they'd code it as secondary crash, no, but over here in this related factors, once they trigger one of these, then an analyst would be able to know that it was secondary to some other type of event or incident. Next slide. Another way we can find responders, and another change in this new MUC, is they added and hopefully got all the different responder types now. So we've got fire trucks and ambulances, police vehicles, safety service patrol, towing, and other. So we tried to pull in, I think with this revision, all the different types of vehicles that would be out on an incident scene. Obviously, anybody could be out there on an incident, but these are the main ones. Next slide. Emergency response is another trigger for us to know that this was an incident or know that a responder was involved. So when a response vehicle is on the scene and emergency warning equipment is in use, like Dr. Bullock was talking about, the emergency lights and them being turned on, that would be coded on the crash report in this particular section. Next slide. When the officer is a officer or responder in general is the traffic control, they're a person flagging or directing traffic, or they've deployed cones, channelizing devices, and other things out there. The presence of a traffic control device, again, lets us know that there's somebody out there hopefully taking care of the management of traffic, and that's a code on a crash report that can help us detect incident condition. Next slide. There's also related factors related to vehicle level data. So if a vehicle's being pushed, or if there is a responder out on the scene doing that point traffic control, or there is other working vehicle out there, that would be something that would be a vehicle level factor that would be documented in that section. Next slide. Big one here. This is a great addition. Driver level factors. So these are related factors for drivers. There's a group there that talks about move over. Maybe the person tried to move over and they were somehow unable or involved in a crash, or they failed to move over and it resulted in a crash. So again, capturing move over as a driver factor is another great addition to the MUC. Next slide. The person. This is where we're going to find that, last year we had 45 incident responders that were struck and killed, and this is hopefully where we find them in crash data. First thing we identify in crash reports is, were they a motorist, driver, passenger, occupant, or were they a non-motorist? In most of the time, our case is a pedestrian out there working on the scene with their high visibility safety apparel on, doing their job. And then what were they doing and what was their role? And that special function is listed there on the right. So when we have a responder involved crash, with this new data element, we're able to know what their role was and what they were doing or what discipline they were representing. Next slide. Now, related to that non-motorist status, identifying specifically what they were doing, again, is another way we find out if they were an incident responder. So the fact that they are elevated to the top of this list. So they've got a whole list of different things that a non-motorist could be doing, and they put incident responder working at a traffic incident as the first one, right out of the attribute list. So that's good for us. And again, looking for responders and crash data. Next slide. Narratives are another place that, again, if we're documenting this was a secondary crash, we're documenting a responder was involved, or a responder vehicle was involved. Narratives are, we're able to search the text and use these text mining tools to find this information. So we're encouraging with this version of the MUC for officers to document things better in their narratives so that those text mining tools may pick those things up. Next slide. So how and when crash reports change, again, I mentioned this earlier, every state's unique. Every state's report is different, and there are different cycles for how often they get revised. What you can do as a responder, as somebody who cares about this TIM data, this data about responders and clearance times and secondary crashes, is talk to the folks who manage your state traffic crash report form. It could be a DOT, a highway patrol, a motor vehicle agency, a revenue agency. It could be somebody at the state level, some office handles your crash report, and just try and find out who that is and let them know that these TIM data elements are important to you and encourage them to include them in their next revision. Next slide. Here are a couple of sources for both of these manuals. Both of them are completely downloadable and free of charge. And so we provided some links here, and I'm sure we'll be able to provide them electronically so that you can click on them. But that's it for my presentation. Next slide. And I appreciate the opportunity to share the new MUC and the new MUTCD with you. So Paul, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, Grady, thanks. We appreciate you, appreciate the summary there. It was great information. I can't emphasize enough. Excuse me, I'm having a moment here with my throat, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is that we simplify how secondary crashes can be collected. So we've had multiple research projects. We had some success in getting secondary crashes on collected through some of the state crash reports. Maybe, I don't know, Grady, do you remember how many collect secondary crashes offhand, roughly?
Off the top of my head, no, I don't. I think it was on one of my earlier slides. About half the states at this point.
Okay, so we do not have a good handle at all on the number of secondary crashes there are nationally. Should be a simple thing, right? But it's not. And we have worked hard over a long time. I've been working probably since 2010, 11, 12 in that area. We started an effort to increase the collection of secondary crashes. So the way you can help with that is going through the traffic records coordinating committee in every state and start hounding them if you don't have them, or if you're not collecting them. This is very similar with the responder struck by data. It's like pulling teeth to get some data on responder struck bys. The Responder Safety Institute does a good job at collecting the fatalities, but they're just doing that sort of internet searches and word of mouth and that sort of thing. But we need a more formal process for that. But more importantly, we don't have a good handle on responder injuries. That is all achievable through the crash reports if we could just bring the collection of those data elements to the next level. And that's where we need your help. Everyone here on this call can, reach out to the TRCC, put it on their radar screen. These changes are in the new MUC, and they'll understand what the MUC is, and that gets their attention immediately. It's not just some request that's out of nowhere. It's, this is something that was coordinated. We worked hard with NHTSA. Grady helped us quite a bit, as well as Kelly Pasha, to work with NHTSA, the folks at NHTSA and the committee that puts together the new MUC. But now we need to get it to the states, and we can use your help. So with that, I'll be quiet with my preaching and begging, and then move on to some of we have quite a bit of activity. And Kelly put in there 14 states. At last count, we're using the MUC secondary crash guidelines. So thanks, Kelly. Kelly Claver is her name, not patient. So we're going to start with some questions. There was quite a few questions with John. Michelle, you want to go there with John with that?
Sure, happy to do so. There were a number of questions, so I'm not going to do them in the order they were delivered, but rather in the order that I think is quite interesting. So there was one on, is there research that supports concepts of blue light fixation, which suggests drivers tend to steer towards a blue roadside light. So, John, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we actually did look at that as part of that study where we talked about the different colors of light, and it was sort of related to that. This sort of moth to flame effect. We didn't find any evidence that drivers were looking or driving more closely or even farther away from any particular colors of lights. So there didn't seem to be any special effect of blue or any other color in the study that we saw, other than the discomfort effect. But in terms of just how closely they might have driven towards the incident, we actually measured that and found there was no difference between any of the colors we looked at.
Very interesting. So myth busting here, potentially. Another question.
Well, not exactly, right? Because blue does represent, so if you're doing it on a close study on a track or something, then that's one thing. But if you're a driver and you see the blue lights representing law enforcement, then you're more apt to respond, I think, right? I mean, I don't know that hasn't been any, I haven't done any research on that. It just anecdotally, that's what we've always understood in the at least the transportation world, is that.
Yeah, I think there definitely is in different, and again, it's state by state. The color coding is different, and so people will have an understanding of what it means for their home state. It doesn't always translate once they cross a state border, so that can sometimes make it more confusing. But yeah, there's definitely when you know it's a police officer, you're going to respond differently than if you think it's not a police officer, for sure.
Unfortunately, that's true. Yes. Thank you, John. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's a good point. And then another question, what should organizations look at when looking to buy lighting technology? Are there features or capabilities that should be prioritized?
Yeah, I think if it's possible, I mean, certainly the nighttime dimming, and that can be automated. It can be put on a light sensor so that when it gets darker, the lights will reduce their intensity, because busy people don't always are not always able to switch the lights down to a lower intensity level, and so that would be something that could help. Things that will change the flash mode when the vehicle goes from drive to park, for example, is another feature at slowing the lights down, for example. Synchronized and sequential lights, if they're possible. I've seen a couple of suggestions in the chat box for different systems that might be available for that. And I think if and when it's relevant, if you have workers outside their vehicles, again, the steady illumination around the vehicle. I'm not talking about takedown lights, which are very bright and in some sense, meant to create some glare. But something, a low level of light around the vehicle just to help people see, are things that can be asked for. Not all systems are going to have all these features, but if you don't ask, you won't have it or know that you have it.
Thank you. And then two other questions. One of them brought up what steady light might be best, and that may relate to that, affiliation with the responder community. And then, yeah, maybe you can answer that, and then we'll do one more.
Sure, I'd say for a steady light, if it's for illumination, if it's lighting the area, a white color is best because it allows you to see the colors of what's in the scene. If you're talking about a steady signal light, a light on the vehicle itself that's helping you see the vehicle, again, probably if there's meanings involved, but if you take that out of the equation, the warmer color, yellow or red, are going to be less uncomfortable to people. They're going to create less discomfort glare. And be just as visible, I guess, in that sense. So, that's something to think about. If you have a bright, steady burning signal light that's blue, it's going to be very uncomfortable at night.
Thank you. And there was a question about, would it be better to err on the side of too bright rather than too dim, with the dim potentially signifying a longer distance? I don't know if you want to address that.
Yeah, I think that question specifically was talking about doing the reflective markings on trailers, flatbeds, and things where you do have a limited area of coverage, right? So you want to make sure that people can see that. So I think that does make sense. That is something to think about. We found that if you have an outline pattern as opposed to covering the entire back of a vehicle with reflective markings, that it's just as visible, it stands out, and you can make make the markings brighter without creating glare because you don't have as much light shining back. So I think that is something, in those underride situations to think about, that if you have a limited coverage area, brighter markings in that situation may be okay. It was a good question.
Thank you. And one final question that just recently was shared. Did you and your team investigate whether vertical light strips affected motorist response times versus horizontal light bars on vehicles?
No, we haven't looked at that question specifically. So that is a good one to see if there would be some difference in what we would expect to see. So it's a good question, but we haven't looked at it specifically, no.
And I'm curious, kind of building on that, are there any other sort of unanswered questions in terms of what future research needs might be there as far as vehicle lighting?
Well, I think, a lot of these questions that we've been doing research are looking at one thing at a time. And I think, we're beginning to get to the point where we have some instinct that reducing the visual chaos can be done. And I think some agencies have been trying things and actually may have some protocols for, I think I heard in the chat box, light shedding types of operations for stationary situations. And I think that information needs to be shared broadly. Maybe this is a venue where that can be done in the future, because not every agency, I think, has that sense that needs to be done, and that could be a good idea. And really, getting the information about how fast vehicles are approaching those situations, and is it, I think collecting some of that practical on the road data would be very useful.
Thank you so much. Any other questions for John? All right. And does anyone have questions for Grady? I know he covered things pretty well and completely, so. All right, so I think we'd like to switch now to the audience listening session. We have a couple of questions, and feel free at this point if you want to share your thoughts. If you want to ask questions, you can raise your hand. It is the third from the right at the bottom of the screen, and Kevin will unmute you and allow you to ask a question. But the FHWA TIM team has a couple of questions and information for you for Crash Responder Safety Week. So, Paul, do you want to cover this, or do you want me to?
Go ahead. I was just reading one of the comments here.
Great activity and
Yeah.
feedback, expertise that's being shared on the chat. So feel free to take a look. Next slide, please. Yes, so as everyone knows, this year Crash Responder Safety Week is actually the third week in November from 18th through 22nd. And this decision was made recognizing that the first week of November is an election week, and the second week will have a federal holiday on a Monday related to Veterans Day. So just please go ahead and mark your calendar. If you have artifacts from last year that you would like to share, please use the QR code, and you can upload content as well as your efforts if you haven't already done so. Next slide. We have two questions for you today. We wanted to get your first thoughts in terms of creative themes or taglines for 2024 and specific topics you'd like to see or hear more about in the all-state planning calls. Recognize that this year we're going to cut down from last year. We had 5 planning calls. This year we're going to move it to 4 planning calls that will take place July through October of 2024. Will likely be the second Wednesday of each month at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you have creative local or state initiatives, if you're thinking of something for CRSW, or you did something last year which was unique, reach out to Jim Ostrich to be a potential presenter during one of the all-state planning calls for Crash Responder Safety Week. So with that, I would love to get your creative thinking caps on. Feel free to raise your hand if you have thoughts or ideas. And Kevin, bring up that first question. Is there something that you have been hearing or seeing over the last year that sort of might spark a connection and say, hey, this might be a good idea for a CRSW theme or tagline for 2024 or focus effort. So I'm going to just leave this open for about 10 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds. And if you don't want to use that, you can also put your ideas through the webinar chat. And then Kevin, if you could also simultaneously open up the second poll question, which is, are there specific topics you want to cover during the all-state planning call? Like, how do I reach out? I've got my state's governor's proclamation process in hand. We've had a proclamation in our state for the last 3 years, but now we saw a lot of mayoral or county proclamations. How do I make that happen? Maybe that's a topic for all-state planning calls. So feel free to add your thoughts on topics of what you want to cover, what you want to hear from your peers as far as gearing up to that November Crash Responder Safety Week. So we will promise to look at your inputs, and we know we're able to identify who provides the input. So if we want follow-up, we may, Jim Ostrich may be reaching out to you guys. So it's just getting the creative juices flowing as we move forward in the year. And with that, I'm going to just pause for a second. Does anyone have questions or thoughts? All right, and I want to also point out there were a number of people that asked the question, can we get slide decks and can we see the recording? I'm not sure where the NOCoE is as far as the sharing of presentation slides right now. I know that there's some changes in that policy, but definitely the webinar recording will be available and accessible on the NOCoE TIM site. And so I'll go ahead and put that NOCoE TIM link in the chat. So feel free to click on that. Not only will this month's recording be there, but we almost have 5+ years of webinar recordings accessible through this NOCoE Talking TIM webinar platform. So with that, let's go to the next slide. Thank you, Kevin. And this is just a free-for-all. We try to finish the Talking TIM webinars about 5 to 10 minutes in advance of our 3 p.m., give you guys a little time back, but wanted to see if anyone has any hot button issues that they're facing in their TIM program or they're coming up on. And there are a couple of questions also in the chat. There was one on what are the demographics of crash responders, lower income, BIPOC, which is an acronym. I'm not going to go through the longer one. Is it similar to frontline workers during COVID? I'm curious, is that something that is of interest for the broader audience? So if you're too shy to raise your hand, feel free to add into this poll if there are any issues or topics that you're currently grappling with that you might think might be a good idea for a future Talking TIM, or you want to be able to hear more or discuss your session. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Paul to close out.
I'm sorry.
I'll turn it back over to you to close out this webinar.
Okay. Yes, there's some comments in there I don't think that we're positioned to respond to, like the last one in there from Doug. I mean, that, that's I do know that most agencies have a process for responders who have seen trauma. There are processes in each agency. How good or bad they are, I have no idea, but Many of those questions that I see in here today are not something that we can really deal with. Would love to follow up with you, Marilyn, the gentleman on the TRCC. We know that there's been many discussions in Maryland. Maryland happens to be one of the better TIM programs in the country. So we've always been surprised that haven't been able to get secondary crashes on that. But we're happy to follow up with you. We won't hound you. But if you want more information from us as to why, and we also have some very good people, TIM people, right in Maryland there at the chart program. So, but with that, trying to think of what else we had in here. But yeah, some of these other questions I'd rather don't have any expertise on, and it's maybe a little bit beyond what we're qualified to comment on. But I'll give it one last call if you want to. I'll let you unmute yourself. Or Kevin can unmute you. Raise your hand. Would be happy to listen to what you have to say. Otherwise, we'll move on.
Paul, can you hear
Yes,
me?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Russ Holt from Rhode Island DOT. The Q1 was put up quick. I did put something in that box, but it was cut off. It moved to Q2. So I just want to quickly say, from the DOT standpoint, I think a big issue for us 2024 and going forward, we know anecdotally risks seem to be going up given distractions in the vehicles and just more and more devices, things like that. But I don't have data to necessarily quantify it. So I didn't know if there's any sessions this year and going forward to really focus on that risk. It's just so high out there. We all know it. You said it well, Paul, but it seems to be getting worse. Every time you're out there, it just gets worse and worse. It's not getting better. And so, anything on that, if it's studies, the presentation today was excellent from the doctor there. I thought that was great. So any data behind the risks and how they're getting worse and what people are doing to help would be great.
I think that unless it's impairment, it's oftentimes, and thank you for the great question, Ross. As always, you're right. Always a great participant. Anecdotally, I agree with you 100%. I don't know that there's data. Maybe we can look into that and find out if there is data. But I just recently did a trip to Florida, and I ended up driving about 4,500 miles. I cannot tell you how many people are looking at their phone, driving in the high-speed lane, going 85, 90 miles an hour, and they have their phone out and they're looking at their phone. I'm like horrified. I want to chase them down and wave the phone at them, put it down or something. But and then all these other distractions, and I have to think the distraction piece has to have a we always the impairment is one thing, but that full just totally distracted when traffic is stopped in front of you because you're looking at the vehicle. I mean, that is good. I don't know if there's data on it. We'll reach out to our NHTSA friends and see if they have any insight into that. But that's a very good question, and I've given that a lot of thought with the miles on the road that I've had of late.
Thank you. It's all roadways, not just freeways. Obviously, it's everywhere. So I agree with you fully there, Paul. Fully.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, crazy. Thanks, Russ. Appreciate it.
Paul, there were a couple of questions on the rollout for the updates to the National TIM Responder Training. Is March 1st still the time frame? And is there going to be a need for instructor recertification associated with the update or refresh?
Yeah, so March 1st is the day after tomorrow, for those of you that don't know that. So I do think it's been put back. Last I heard, it has been pushed back a couple of weeks, but not much more. We are ready to go with that. I think more to come on that. That's pretty close to being ready. The updates will not require a recertification, no, but we are I think we are planning on doing a series of not maybe a series, well, at least one or two, at least, webinars where we'll, focus on the trainers alone, where we can share what the changes have been. So, yeah, and I expect that sometime in March. Jim, that's Jim's area with our TIM program. I do participate, but I don't have the latest and greatest on when the actual release will come. I can tell you that the National Highway Institute, the online version of that is being worked on. That will be delayed beyond the in-person one. That will be some months behind that, maybe this summer. We're trying to get so complicated, when these, online learning programs, to get everything lined up. But anyways, I won't bore you with that, but that will be some months behind, the online version, so. Anything else, Michelle?
No, I think we're good. We are 5 minutes from end, so I think this is a great time to close. And big thanks to our two presenters today.
Yeah.
Very informative.
Yep, absolutely. And thank you, everyone, for participating. We'll see you next month. Did we mention what we're having next month, Michelle? But
Yeah, I believe it was on the very beginning of the slide deck.
I'll check that.
I can tell you, I believe one of the presenters is the Missouri DOT and Highway Patrol doing a full-scale TIM demonstration. And tentatively, the second presentation is on an active 911 system for interoperable communications.
Okay. All right, well, we'll send up our normal notifications anyways to everyone. Thank you all for what you do and for participating with us and for being partners. And yeah, we'll hope to be hearing from you all soon, and see you next month, if nothing else. Thanks, everybody.